Recently, I watched Time of Eve, a series from some 15 years ago that seems to have gone largely under the radar. I wasn't aware of it at all until someone in my Discord recommended it to me with 6 episodes. I figured, well, why not give it a shot? The premise is simple. Take the virtual assistant built into your phone right now and give it a more tangible form. It still does all the same things, you still treat it the same way, but now it does so looking and sounding like a human, and with the added benefits from that. They can hold umbrellas in the rain, carry your bags, make food, and a whole lot more. Still somewhat in their infancy though, as the opening says, robotics are commonplace, but androids are still entering that final stage of adoption with a lot of pushback. There's specific fervor in the background, mostly framed about what they call android-holics, people, mostly younger ones who are dependent on androids. They specifically hate how some people come to treat them as humans. Girls snicker at you if you treat one well, and TV presenters say that speaking to machines over people will make an entire generation socially inept. They question the existence of physically explicit androids, thinking that if something like that becomes real, then people might swear off human relationships entirely, ridding themselves of our complexity for machine simplicity. It's a stir about the future versus the past. How will a new generation function with the advancements these androids bring? Of course, this is a concern of physicality, about continuing a species by making sure the kids can cook if the android breaks and things like that. And there's really nothing new there. Vsauce has a fantastic video about these kinds of generational divides, in our modern day expressed about cell phones and video games, but dating back hundreds of years to magazines or letters, where writers remarked that families sitting around the fire with their faces buried in text was the end of interaction as we knew it. With each new convenience, people began to worry that the next generation would be raised incorrectly, weakened by their better conditions. There is a premise for this. As Michael explained from his research, survival plays a large role here. We're creatures gathering information to make better decisions, and so naturally we have an opinion about how kids should be raised from our own childhood, the information we took in. If we grew up and reproduced, then we're a species success, and so the methods used on us must be correct in some way. So when faced with the outcomes of new advancements versus known success of the past, we tend to believe we're better in the old methods. After all, we lived, right? These fears, however annoying, aren't all mean-spirited or simple resistance to change when we consider this basis. Although it is true they often develop into unfounded guesswork, using one's own perspective as proof, inconsiderate of wider circumstances. Maybe the tactics used to raise a child worked in past conditions, but wouldn't today. For example, kids probably could stand to be away from devices just a bit more, but then they would struggle socially from doing so. Imagine trying to maintain friendships without the ability to text. I mean, would people really take the inconvenience to be your friend when there's more convenient options? So for a child, we have to consider, is the overstimulation worth the semi-abandonment within society? There's no simple answer. You can't implant the past into the future and expect the same results. As such, these generational ideas tend to devolve into ignorance and guessing games, breaking free from their somewhat logical premise. We start to act not based on logic, but based on emotion. But this is where things get interesting, because it takes them from a concern not about future humans, but about what it will mean to be a human in the future to begin with, or at its basis, what does it mean to be human? Whether you're actively considering this or not, it's on your mind because of the value this term provides. We have human rights. People express sympathy by saying they're human beings, and writers across time have appealed to our minds through the inexplicable nature of human. While kids nowadays even type being human is exhausting, implying its high requirements. We feel that inherently there is something to respect about it, which is distinct from the other life around us, looking at nature and even our own creations to prove a superiority of sorts. We suffer for our thought, but it also gives us worth. And much like how we are raised determines our idea of what raising a kid should be, how we develop a sense of humanity determines what we believe a human to be. As we grow, we gather information and make this decision. We grow up and change physically and mentally, moving out and coming back. We come to make friends and have those same bonds break. We spend time working and other time enjoying. And the specifics of those things we can latch onto from their abstract emotions anchor the human definition. Did you meet those friends at school? School becomes a human experience. Do you enjoy books in your time off? Reading becomes a human experience. These aspects blend to create a human in our mind, and as such, what provides us a large chunk of that inherent value. And then we witness someone from a different culture doing things that feel foreign and maybe even disgusting to us, and yet they're just as human as we are to the people around them and maybe even the ones around us. We feel our efforts and our experiences conflict with others but be treated the same way. It begins to feel like one could do anything and still be human, so was there really a reason for all the things we did? Did we need to work and express ourselves? Did we need to love? And nothing we specifically did had value to it. It's just that it was done by a human. It's unique, but to no end. In a way, the definition of human ceases to be worthwhile if everyone holds it. So some try to maintain that value by pushing back, drawing a hard line in the sand of what is and isn't worthy of being human so that some don't have it. They decide that their experience is the definitive state, mental simplicity to avoid the ultimate consideration. Am I worth anything? They can even come to hate other definitions to push back against the natural rising of the question, deep down feeling threatened by them, knowing that their existence can take away the value found in exclusion. Negative emotions expressed against others become crucial to the self, and exclusion becomes king. And nowhere is this more extreme than in robotics, because these creations of our own mimic us in odd ways. We gather information and make decisions based on it, but so do they. We may say our scope is wider, but we often limit it just like they are, our cognitive and confirmation biases acting aplenty. For example, what we just discussed in viewing other cultures and ways of life as invalid. We cease to take in information based on boundaries that we set. To keep drawing the line, we may say we have no programmer, but then what is nature? Our DNA acts as some sort of code at least, our electrical impulses matching their function in a way. It seems we simply created something in our image, or at least via the principles we knew in these machines. And then they often come to perform the same functions as us, seen now more than ever as so many tasks are thoughtlessly automated away. Our efforts don't come to mean as much when something without feeling can perform them. And so we look to those very feelings as the exclusion. Sure, they can almost think like us, sound like us, and maybe even move like us, but they can't feel like us. We are still valuable for this reason, our very suffering and the potential to lack it at times. We create art against the rules of nature, suffering for a craft because we are greater in feeling. We sacrifice for love, going against personal survival for something greater. Our illogic becomes the logic of value. But then we imagine, what if they could? If they did feel, or at least if we treat what we witness as them feeling, where does our value come from? These things can think faster than us, perform tasks quicker than us, and all without this squishy, weak body and brain, without the need for food and water, without the need for reassurance and comfort. Or other humans having it lowers the definition's floor, robots having it removes it entirely by proving that we are nothing more than machines ourselves, nature's flawed mechanisms. So people defend, with the abstractness of emotions becoming a shield. That incomprehensible thing which comes from the thoughts and feelings of another becomes what it means to be human in the modern age, where our tools often surpass their users. So what would happen then if you were moved by the actions of a machine? Could you ignore your own sense for what is or isn't human? This is exactly the situation of Time of Eve's main character, Rikuo. Formerly, he was a youth pianist, planning on pursuing that as his future career. And he was good too, at least enough so to win a competition large enough to be in the papers. However, at that very competition, something outshined him. An android gave a performance. In what should have been his moment, a robot stole the headline and performed just as well as any human could have, almost invalidating all this hard work and effort when we consider that it's just code provided without feeling behind it, without sacrifice to reach that level of skill. However, without feeling behind it, he can still reason his value, right? Exactly because it lacked those things, it can't be valuable. But then the performance moved him. In the keystrokes of synthetic fingers, he found a sense of emotion that music always brings. So those things must have been there. So he quits. Because the invalidation of all his effort doesn't come from the novelty of a basically pre-recorded performance. A machine could be programmed to play instruments, and while it's impressive in an engineering sense, we wouldn't come back to it for day-to-day listening. People would still choose human performers because we find something in the pain of art, the emotions put into a song that can only come from human efforts. But if he felt those from a machine, then what value is there to him doing this task? He's less perfect at it, and not even for a unique reward like emotions improving the final product. His own feelings invalidated his work by coming from a machine. The abstract human nature of playing no longer means anything once this barrier is crossed. And so he gives up. He lets his future fall into non-distinct hands. Where his friend Masaki is planning ahead and ready to tackle a difficult career for his fulfillment, Rikuo sort of drifts along, sitting alone at home, doing nothing much at all. One of the things he drifts to is digging into the logs of his android, Sammy, as he found an error in them, a line reading, "Are you enjoying the time of Eve?" and GPS coordinates to a specific place. Since she refuses to notice this discrepancy, he determines to go there himself and see if some sort of will is at play, bringing Masaki along. What they find is a cafe with one interesting rule: no discrimination between humans and androids. They see an android go in with his distinctive ring, signaling that's what he is, but then he sits inside with it turned off, the distinguishing feature gone. There is no way to tell who is what within these walls. And when you try to leave, the door locks for 2 minutes to preserve secrecy, so outside there's very little clue either. In there, they find a world of confusion as they try to discern which patrons are flesh and which are not, and why they even care in the first place. In this confusion, Rikuo's fear grows worse, with the human definition becoming less and less evident at each point and more based on seemingly assumption. That is, he learns just how little it takes to be seen as human, and as a boy with nothing else but his power over one android, comes to fear this. For example, on their first time there, the pair meet Akiko, a girl their age who forces her way into their conversation. She talks loud, fast, and endlessly, it seems, a bright personality overtaking the room to explain who everyone is. The connections she's made are what she seems to first define herself by, if the introductions we choose mean anything about us. Within their curiosity, Masaki tries to dig for information, asking if she has an android at home. After a pause, she says yes, but goes on to more important things surrounding it, saying that's exactly why she's here, to understand the others. To be around something not like her and understand where the distinction lies and how she can further grow from this. Really, it's not too different from them, maybe just better spirited. Where they look to draw the line, she looks to blur it further. Except they assume she's speaking about androids when she is one. They see her the next day at school with a ring above her head and being mistreated by a human. It's shocking to them, as she seemed so human. They've never known an android capable of being so free and open, to speak so loudly and have so many connections. So based on their own perspective, they assume she must be human, even though she never actually gave them a definitive answer as to whether she is or isn't. She never said the android at home wasn't herself. Much like with the reason for the human definition, they simply wanted evidence to think in the way which would be the most pleasing to them, and so her vague answer was taken as they wished. Someone who so clearly thinks and feels must be, or rather has to be, human for their sake. This hazy area where assumption overrules evidence makes things difficult, which is exactly why she's here. She can speak about everyone because she's spoken with everyone. Knowing them on a deep level begins to remove the haze, and with that removes the danger that these assumptions of perspective create. For example, think about her life. She's this bubbly person, almost impossible to get to stop talking, but all the time except at Eve, she has to stand still, motionless, and take orders that dehumanize her. If her owners just said, "Tell me about yourself," honestly, she could go on for hours. She could speak and express this, and they could see she has many of the human traits they use to define themselves. If anything gave them the inkling to wonder, they could understand her that easily. However, if someone is throwing their bag at you before you can even speak, then they've already made the assumption that you're not human, so there's no point in asking. They've already deferred to cognitive simplicity and even more, maybe derive value from this. Even if an android did become human, they would never know because they don't care to. The very principle for value from a definition like this is then dangerous. It includes value, but it excludes thought, tends people away from evidence to assumption. By making up their minds beforehand, all proof will be missed from not looking. How many other androids have the time of Eve message and no one even bothered to wonder, to notice their android was gone or to check where it went to? How many just thought it was an error and moved on? Akiko speaks with everyone to get around this, taking in their perspective to widen her own. She still calls her owners family because she simply understands that they don't have the conditions to understand. The same reason these two made their assumption. Using sugar cubes as props, she eats one which represents the others, an expression of literally taking in what others provide to give herself energy and growth to keep going. It's simple. From the perspective of others, we grow and change. It's the search for evidence of a machine making outputs from inputs, but with emotion behind it, feelings and connections. And isn't that a human? But this idea is also more difficult. Assumptions are, well, assumptions. They're easy because that's their point. Speaking with every person in the cafe would be uncomfortable and awkward and at times even painful, a much more daunting task than looking for a ring. We see this as the story progresses even, as a lot of these moments are ones you'd wish not to be in. The defense against danger is quite difficult, and that leads to more anger for the humans. Rikuo gets angry at Sammy later, asking why she's trying to imitate human behavior for this reason. He wants it to be simple imitation because that's the easiest outcome. The one where he doesn't have to work to be human, the one where assumption reigns. But despite the duo's resistance to the idea of meeting anyone, as they come back a few times just to sit with each other, Nagi, the cafe's barista, eventually forces them to interact with the customers less outgoing than Akiko, firstly Koji and Rina. The pair is almost comically tropish, spending all their time with only each other and speaking about a deep and passionate connection. You know, the kind where you don't need anyone else because you have them and those kind of things. It feels like the silliest human thing, like all the relationships we cringe at random moments from our younger years. But Masaki makes a mostly correct assumption about them. Koji is an android-holic, and Rina is the android. And it's true to some extent. She was a self-defense model for an important person, but he modified her to be useful for, well, other purposes as well. After saving him from an attack on his life, she was damaged, but due to the very modifications, she can't be sent in for repairs, and so she's abandoned. To understand her, we have to think about her in contrast to Akiko. The latter speaks about having a family at home and considering herself even as a part of it. She might not be treated very humanly, but she's still a part of their lives, from picking one of them up after school to cooking for them during mealtimes. In a way, then, she's part of the human world. She can be kind to them because of this. Rina, as an illegal android essentially, doesn't have any of that, the assumptions of humanity. Malfunctioning and deserted with nowhere but this place to be, she focuses all of her attention to drag value out from elsewhere, clinging to Koji to find that value, even as this relationship can be very devaluing in many ways. For anyone we know, it would probably be quite a detrimental thing. She's basically an other woman. Koji isn't loyal specifically to her, as we find out from his photos, which she isn't in any of, even though we see them take a picture together to make things worse. Further, their time is limited to the cafe because she is both illegal and also can be seen with him clearly, and to put it all together, even she can describe him as cold and distant. This kind of partnership could probably drive any human insane in many ways, just being this other woman. But then, woman is still included in that label. Well, it's a devaluing perspective for many, To her, who has nothing, it's uplifting in a way because its negative connotations still rely on an overarching one of being human to some degree. It still includes the attention of someone she believes to be human, the thoughts and feelings of one applied to her, and that's quite human in itself, is it not? How often do we feel the need for assurance and connection just to survive? The togetherness they do share is still the most humanizing thing she can know, even with its flaws. Rikuo witnesses this, and in the moment he does comfort her. He draws on his own experience, and from this tells her to be honest with Koji, because he understands how important seemingly mundane or unimportant things can be. To not have much going on at all, and to have someone care about bringing you better coffee still. Sometimes it is nothing, but depending on where and who you are, like a boy with so much time he'll dig into his android's logs, it can be everything, or at least really nice. He knows this because obviously this specific example is what Sammy did for him and what he got angry at. And Rina caps this all off by saying, "You understand, don't you?" driving the point home. Not just the derivation of value in perspective, but of the blurring of the line. Rikuo is relating to an android, understanding the same feelings as her and why she has them. The line between them fades, as what she said forced him to consider his own situation, his own thoughts and desires. Normally, another human does this, the value of their life driving our reconsideration. But now, an android did it. So that value either makes them human, or is removed from our source of value, if we keep the line at least. This is the game, the definition narrowing as we pile on more experiences of things not like us. First was the piano, but it was distant, a general thing about humans and robots. But now this, it's more personal, it cuts deeper, removes even more from the list, gives one more personally to think about. Will he learn to be better about these things then, finding new ways to be human, or find even less reason to do them? If something so little can define one's humanity and create an undeniable expression of it, what does it mean for his value, for all his efforts, for the kind of person who never had to work or think about what being human means? The next encounter takes this premise to even more of an extreme. On an empty day at the cafe with Rikuo and Masaki as the only customers, they get a visitor who's a bit less assumption prone. In walks a stuttering, sputtering, smoking android of an earlier make. Where Rikuo could easily be seen as human and Rina could at least easily feel human, this android has none of those assumption-based graces. In every way, he is clearly inhuman. And it goes into his behavior. We witness as he quite literally takes in information and makes calculations based on it with inferior logical circuits that take everything as truth without nuance and lead to the pair having to try their hardest to prevent him from feeling inhuman as he abides by the cafe's rule, something else he took in without question like a fact of the world. You can trace every single interaction he has back to the data he took in to create it. Not too subtly shown when he replays people's own words at them, literally making words data. As his head crooks to the side and he goes to the bathroom to hide it, Rikuo and Masaki laugh, saying to an annoyed Nagi that this one's just too much, it's so clearly not human. After all, there's nothing human about him. Why even keep up such a farce? However, on her insistence that they do, and through the conversation they have, this lack of humanity gets confirmed in a much darker way. He was once a childcare android, used by a family to help raise their young son. He had a purpose and followed it perfectly. However, it was a purpose on a timer, as when the child grew up and he became outdated, there was no reason to keep him around. Not wanting to pay the disposal fee, his family scratches off the serial number, wipes his data, and tosses him into the garbage. The very thing which raised their child, sitting in the trash, years and years of effort ignored. There's not much more dehumanizing than that, to be literally discarded with our refuse. So there he is, stumbling into the cafe without memory, purpose, functionality, or anything really. He's not just lesser in assumption than the other two cases, he's lesser in everything. And so he speaks about the importance of a name, the last thing he has left. Kind of. The sound file is corrupted, so he can't actually remember what the child he cared for so long sweetly called him, but in his lack of human nuance, he takes the corrupted sound as his name. It seems small and stupid, but Listening to the two humans state that an introduction is important, he repeats it until they listen with open ears. Based on the information he's taken in, this is a defining trait of human beings. Of course, it's also because this is all he has left. He can't even remember the face of the child who his life revolved around, let alone any of their contact information. This messed up sound file is everything of meaning in his life. The perspective matters. To those with so much more than a name, with family or love or power, it becomes a meaningless thing, just a label to gain our attention. But to someone with nothing, it is the last remaining mark of anything, the last case that one was ever even alive to begin with, proof that someone once found you valuable enough to call you something distinct that they thought about and cared about and loved. It becomes the sole arbiter of emotions, all the things which draw the line between man and machine collected into one name, one idea, one moment. His last, where he asks them to remember his name, if nothing else. A name which carries the weight of his whole life, and one he couldn't even tell them what it was. So much is lost in these few seconds where, with his last fragments of memories restored, Kotoran powers down for good. It's a powerful moment with a gentle song ringing out after it to allow us a moment to contemplate. The entire series is good, but it's worth watching just for this moment alone. To feel those emotions boiled down and collected and be moved by them. We knew him for only some 15 minutes, and many comments said it was a tearful episode for them. They were moved by experience just as we would be with any human. Experience strong enough that despite all the jerky movements, all the odd questions, all the inhuman expressions, we look at this thing and we feel a human sadness. We feel what it would be to have our name spoken for the last time. We feel something of ourselves. Something of ourselves which arose from the simplest of areas, a name. Something each and every one of us has, and the first thing we're given upon the start of our life. It is one of the most basic aspects of what it means to be human, to be named. And so if a name can draw this kind of emotion, what's left for the human being to be valued from? If it was all there from the start, all so simple and achievable just from living, even under the purpose of another, what is all of this for? Why do we debate definition and exclude others for value? Why do we write long prose and ring out lyrics in songs? Why do we spend years painting and more observing it, standing around in a gallery saying, "Ah, yes"? Why are we here right now discussing the implications of a story which took tens if not hundreds of people to write and animate and score and market and so much more? It's so much effort, so many layers of this and that to distinguish ourselves, each one going so far beyond the name that everyone has to make something unique, even though a name alone can be so powerful. Just like being moved by an automated song, when we see a name mean so much, don't we start to doubt all this effort? We wanted a proof of value derived in exclusion and limitation, but here we are trying and debating endlessly to achieve it. Like Kotoran, we are machines making calculations and having impulses, only we take so much of that energy to cover it with fancy talk and big words. We feel the need to be more so that others are less. Being human itself starts to feel kind of pointless. And so, Rikuo, despite being friendly with and even moved by all the androids he meets at Eve, also begins to find anger in his discovery. Each time they widen his perception on what it means to be human, his own value shrinks more and more, with aspects of emotion chopped off the list, becoming less and less exclusive until now a name alone passes the test. It wasn't just the piano he did for nothing, it was everything. Nothing has proven him more than a machine. Expressing this depression in a horrible mood at Eve, where he throws off every other customer before heading upstairs to be alone, Rina tries to help him by telling him, "You saved me." But he can only respond with, "Is that so?" Because that's exactly the issue. If they're all human, as he felt and expressed to her, then what is he? Where is his value? Sitting alone and pissy, he hears the piano being played from downstairs and heads to see who it is, and it's Sammy. She speaks about picking it up from watching, which means she plays because of Rikuo. An android, the thing that took away the feeling of his purpose in life, saying he's the very reason it plays. And in that second, the last indicator of his status, his power over something else, fades as she keeps expressing her will. With the final straw broken, it's maddening, and he begins to rush down the stairs to confront her in this anger. But as he does, his memories change this perspective. Maybe he's been looking at the thing wrong this whole time. For him, humanity is something to lose, but for them, it was something to gain. Something unique and beautiful in each one, whether it was through learning, loyalty, or even remembrance. It was all distinct pathways to becoming valuable. Things they chose of their own will, things they gained because they went out and decided to, much different than clinging to an ever-narrowing circle of value. Where he and the humans are sticking to these hard-set principles that cause conflict, the androids are finding rules of their own, one which matter only to them. They don't fight over them exactly because they aren't universal. One takes nothing away from the others by existing. In all this variety, the very lack of a definition for what it means to be human, they could all decide what it meant for them. And while this doesn't provide instant value the way the human assumption does, that is, it requires work and effort, we're all putting that in anyway, just as they were. Rikuo practiced the piano for years and years, defining himself through his efforts, only to have them destroyed exactly because of the prominent mindset. That work was done, so why believe something which can kill it? Why not believe that which assures it will be something, as long as we tried and keep trying? After all, if they can do this, that is, if androids, if anyone, even something not human can be so, why can't we still be just the same? And with their method, he can be his own human. When he says to Sammy, "I'd hate it if even you were good at piano," it's expressing that if anyone, even someone so inhuman, could be good at it, what's the point? It's that mindset of exclusion. But now he plays again for exactly the same reason. To hell with it all, because if it can be anyone's, it can still be his. He doesn't have to uphold any principles but his own. There's more work, but with less pressure. After all, Sammy is finding value in it and doing it poorly at that. It's not being good at it or doing something only she can do that makes her happy. To someone expressing her will for the very first time, it's simply deciding to do something and doing it, which allows her to be happy. Not power or skill, not anything but the decision to be human, a decision that can't be taken away. It doesn't have to lessen anything that she can play piano too, if we start believing it doesn't have to. There is work to this. Without the assumption of humanity, there's no easy way to do it. We can't simply look at a rule and say, "I am valuable." We have to consider it for ourselves, understand who we are and what makes us feel so. We have to expand that circle of perspectives and grow to be certain of ourselves and our beliefs. And that kind of sucks, having to gather all those perspectives to understand those things. It is, in its own way, a difficult task. I'm someone who wants to meet all the people I can, and even I struggle at having the energy to do so. The world is much more complex than just saying, "think differently," and watching it happen. But this difficulty also means that it can't be taken away from us with a definition change. No matter what someone else says is human, we can be certain of our own human. It could help avoid a lot of danger, bringing those we often leave unconsidered back into the fold for the better. The conflict in Time of Eve comes about because people are clinging to this ready-made value of being human, that we are greater than other things. Some advancement named androids came along, and suddenly that didn't feel so guaranteed anymore, so people started making ads and forming committees and ignoring androids while using them at the same time, treating them poorly to feel valuable. The threats, the violence, the horrid jokes, they all come about from this one assumption. Instead of all the time and effort to make those ads and those jokes, what if we spent it finding our own human instead? It's the same amount of work, but for something much more stable, something much more inclusive, garnering value in a way that won't be removed by the next advancement. Rikuo is in pain exactly because that was the principle he followed, the former one, and it was taken away from him via his own emotions at that. That's how weak it is. He solves it by witnessing all these others, their own stories and perspectives, and seeing that there is no one way to pin down what it means to be human. There is no line, it's a constant blur, and every definition falls away. No set of words encapsulates everything. It's impossible. And then, faced with almost despair from this, you embrace that fact. Because you can make it whatever you want to be. You can draw your line wherever. You can be anything and still be human. And even if that needs a bit more work, that's pretty great, isn't it? And that will wrap things up for this one. God, it's been a while since I said that at the end of a video. Jeez. If you know this series, you know I actually only covered 5 of the episodes here and actually kind of left out like half of another one, which is kind of like a testament to the quality of the show, that it can still provide this much kind of thought and different things to discuss, and still evolve something that deep without even its full runtime, with only really like 4.5 episodes. Not to say those other episodes or parts were bad, just that they were things I think didn't quite need to be added on to discuss what we had here. And of course, if you think they do, you can let me know down below, because if I'm wrong, that's good, because that means there's even more to this message I didn't get, and I'd rather have that than be right. So obviously let me know those thoughts down below, but of course, being transparent, that also helps this video do well in the algorithm and stuff, so I kind of have a bias in saying that. I know most people don't care, I feel like I have to. I have a big thing about like biases in marketing and advertising and all this stuff, so I feel the need to say it and ramble a lot. It really has been a while since I rambled. It feels kind of good, actually. It feels much more like a better time of mentality when I was doing this, but we'll discuss that in a different video coming up. Anyway, links in the comments, Discord. I still link Twitter. I don't use it. It's stupid. Most importantly, Patreon, where these lovely people above me support me in making stupid crap like this every week. Every other week. Anyway, thanks for watching. Hope I'll see you again soon. God, that was a terrible outro.